You're listening to Underground History, a collaboration between Jefferson Public Radio and the Southern Oregon University Laboratory of Anthropology, or SULA. I'm your host, Chelsea Rose, and each episode we take a deep dive into little-known aspects of history in the region and beyond. Today, I'm joined in the studio by Bureau of Land Management archaeologist Tony Saunders and Duane Erikson, who just returned from an adventure down the wild and scenic Rogue River, where they were given some love to a cabin built 100 years ago by Zane Gray. Tony and Duane, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
And the reason we're speaking in this boring studio and now not out in the wilds of the Rogue River is because it's not easy to get out there. And I know we talked about me joining you in the field, and there was a very complicated route of cars and ATVs and hikes and stuff. But you guys came down river to the site it's on Winkle Bar, is that correct?
That's correct. It's about a one full day float from the Grave Creek Ranch to the Winkle Bar, and then about a day float to our pullout station. So 2 days on the river just for travel time.
That sounds like a tough gig.
We here in the Grants Pass field office are really lucky to work with a very talented river program who is part of our recreation staff. They help manage the wild and scenic section of the Rogue River. And fortunately for the archaeology department, the Zane Gray Cabin is a big priority for them as well. So they've been very supportive of us in this effort to repair the cabin.
Yeah, and so before we get into the cabin specifically, let's just talk a little bit about, a lot of people probably don't realize that there are dedicated cultural resource managers on public lands like the BLM, and you are tasked with preserving and protecting and documenting thousands of years of history, from folks just living and working along the river for millennia to the gold miners and hunting and fishing, and a site like this, which ties into American literary history. So can you speak to me a little bit about the challenges of having such a broad scope of things you get to and have to do in a day?
Said a very problematic word there, which is in a day, and it varies so much from day to day. Last week, we were working on the Zane Gray Cabin. Yesterday, I was working on gold mines, and I also had a conversation with our tribal partners talking about significantly older resources on our district. So it's so varied. It's very hard to give a nice little snippet that is informative, but it varies based on the projects that we work on.
So you get to wear, or have to, but probably mostly it's interesting, you get to wear a lot of hats. And I know, Duane, you really are tasked with a lot of mining stuff. So you do a lot of the abandoned mine land stuff. Can you speak to that a little bit too?
Yes, I've been on the abandoned mining lands team as an archaeologist since 2009. Before that, I was into the mining history on my own since I was a child. So I travel throughout Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Colorado, Nevada, and work on abandoned mining lands, the cultural side of understanding the history of them and trying to preserve and understand and move forward on projects that might impact them.
Yeah, so there's so much there that you guys get to do. So let's get back to Zane Gray. So he built his, 2026 is 100 years since that cabin was built, and he wrote books there, but also kind of was like an early influencer to rivers are cool, you can hunt and fish, and it really helps spur recreation and people thinking about the intrinsic value of a wild and scenic river. So before we get into what you guys were doing out there, can you speak to us a little bit about the importance of the site, or how you think about this as a resource manager, the so what of this site? Why is it worth protecting?
So for me, I didn't know who Zane Gray was before I started this job, and was fascinated to learn about what he does right there. I mean, in some parts, the site is cool because it's an old cabin that we can let the public come up and see, and that's something very tangible. When you're a child, you don't care so much that this guy wrote a lot of books. But the fact is, as I grow older, you realize he did write books, including some books that are based off events that happened in the Rogue River. And I'm going to put a plug in for one of them called Rogue River Feud, which is based off of an actual series of murders that happened along the Rogue River while he was living there. It really inspired him, and if you ever have the chance to go down the Rogue River, you'll see why. And in a sort of cruel twist of irony, the reason he left the cabin is because his own writings popularized the river so much that there were more people going down it than he was comfortable with.
Oh, it was like the big line out after TikTok makes something famous, there's a big line. He was a victim of his own success, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
I didn't realize he was in the true crime game. So he's writing basically a true crime book about events that happened there?
I don't know if I would use the word true. It was inspired by.
Okay.
It was inspired by.
He's most known for really popularizing the Western genre. If you've ever watched a Western movie, you're probably seeing something that was influenced by what he did. And he wrote over 100 books that sold hugely. In his day, he was one of the hugest celebrities in America. And so if you've watched any Western movie where the good guy takes out the villains and saves the town, that was his kind of he brought that to our attention.
Yeah, he's kind of created that narrative arc, that we come to expect with those kind of Western stories. So how did he end up in the Rogue River? Or on the Rogue River? He
was an avid sportsman. He loved fishing and hunting and devoted most of his life to it, and he was very good at it. And he first came to the Rogue River in 1919, I believe, and floated it. At that time, it was a very wild river, and you put the boat in, then the boat floated one time, then you threw the boat out because there's no way to get it back upstream. So you had to have a handcrafted boat to do it, and there was a handful of people that did it. And it was a much rougher river than it is now. It's been made a little more tame by some later actions. So he was a true adventurer, and he wanted to experience the wildest places he could find, and the Rogue River was and still is that place.
Wow. And he you can't just go buy and build a cabin. He bought a mining claim to build a cabin on, right? Is that how he got access to have a space there?
Yeah, he bought a mining claim, which is how a lot of those cabins were originally started, is they were originally mining claims that people just sort of stayed on and tried to live there. That persisted really until it became a wild and scenic river where that was no longer in the management goals.
Yeah, so now I think you guys tore down a lot of those in the 60s, right, or 70s, some of those
60s
old
and
cabins.
70s, yeah.
Yeah, because the idea is to keep it wild and scenic, and if there's a bunch of vacation homes along there, that kind of is against the goal. Yeah. You're listening to Underground History on the Jefferson Exchange. I'm your host, Chelsea Rose, and today we are commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Zane Gray Cabin. So let's talk about the work you did. So this cabin is 100 years old. Like you said, Tony, it's cool not only because of who built it and lived there, but also just as wow, old cabin, awesome. So people can connect and interact with it in different ways. So was it falling over? What happened? What were you guys drawn to get out there and do this work?
I started working on the cabin in 2009, shortly after the Bureau of Land Management acquired the property, and it was almost near collapse at the time. It had been covered with tarps and had plywood over the windows, and it is dire. And we were able to fall some logs, peel them, and shore up the worst of the rotted logs. But it's a process. Cabins were never meant to last in a wet environment without paint or a foundation. So it's a constant upkeep. It's not something you do once and walk away from. It's pretty remarkable. It's still there 100 years later.
So you need to use the traditional materials that he would have had access to and used. So you're peeling the logs, you said, right? You can't just come in with plywood.
That's correct. We use period-correct materials and tools as much as possible to replicate the workmanship on it. And it must be understood that this was his fishing cabin. This wasn't a home, so it probably wasn't built as substantially. And we're trying to replicate his work, not improve it or make it something it's not.
Yeah, and you have to bring all the tools you need, the saws, the whatever, on the raft?
Correct.
Oh, jeez.
The logistical challenges of this project were quite large, and I'm going to put in another plug for the river program. And if I sound like a broken record by the end of this, I apologize, but I really do want to highlight our rec crew, who are very hardworking, and they're very talented, and they were able to procure all the supplies we needed, get them down the river, and provide help with the labor, because this may surprise you, but the archaeology staff is not extensive, so we really leaned on them a lot, and they were instrumental in falling the trees, peeling the log, and helping us with the carpentry and installation removal of the logs.
And so when you're restoring the building, are you kind of trying to make it restored good as new, quote unquote, or are you kind of going with the vibe of suspended decay? Do you want it to look old and maybe it's a little crooked, but it's not going to fall down?
I think we're going for more of a suspended decay, and we there's words we gotta use carefully. It's preservation and restoration, It's more of a preservation than a restoration. That we're not trying to make it new again. We're trying to leave it as people remember it, but keep it standing so people can enjoy it.
Yeah, that's great. And so are there archaeological components as well? I mean, both of you guys usually are dirt archaeologists, not upright ruins. We don't often get a chance to work with ruins as such. So are you also considering this as like an archaeological site where there's like maybe, the remains of his meals, there's fish bones, I don't know, things like that out there?
We haven't done any subsurface investigations, almost certainly. And the way we manage the Rogue Wild and Scenic is we treat all of it like it has the potential to be an archaeology site for various reasons. The biggest being it's just very hard to do subsurface investigations along a river, particularly since it's a wild and scenic river, the BLM's policy is let's do as little as we can there. So I don't want to use the term hands-off, but we do try to avoid as much disturbance within the wild and scenic as possible.
Yeah, not only logistics, getting screens and shovels down there, but just also the other side. And I guess when you think about it as an archaeological site, undoubtedly indigenous people hung out in the spot, and then it obviously was a mining claim first. So there's probably layers of history in a lot of these areas, because a good place to like pull up a boat or to hang out is a good place to pull up a boat and hang out, huh?
That's correct. If it's a good spot for one cultural group to enjoy and live in, it's a good spot for everyone. And it's certainly been used by all groups through the years. We did find a few artifacts while working on the cabin. I think we found Zane Gray's fork.
Oh.
And Zane Gray's newspaper, which we back a excerpt from 1936. It chronicled the Spanish War, so that would have been during Zane Gray's time. So nothing major, but fun stuff.
Yeah, like in the floorboards or the walls or something?
Correct.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. And one other thing I want to think about when you are tasked with managing, stuff along the river and even something like that that's really vulnerable, fire. So I know this stretch of river has had a lot of fires in the last couple of years, and I found out the hard way when I was trying to drive to do a hike at Rainy Falls and drove like over an hour and had to turn around because the road was closed. So I know a lot of impact has been happening. So what do you do? Does that keep you up at night, like worrying about how to like save resources like that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do resource advising for wildland firefighters during fire season, which is coming up. As we all know, it's been a dry winter here in Southern Oregon. Last year, we had a big scare with the Kelsey Peak fire, which happened probably 2 or 3 miles away from the cabin, and thankfully we were able to catch it before it got too close. Having said that, we do have tentative plans. We have structure wrap stage on hand. We have in the past floated firefighters down to the cabin before so that they can structure wrap around the building. We keep it mowed, which seems like something so trivial, but just mowing the grass around that cabin goes a long way to limiting the fire danger. There's hazard trees that we remove so that embers from those don't fall on the cedar shake roof. So it is something that causes me a lot of heartburn, but it's also something that we're actively managing.
Yeah. And how do most people get an opportunity to experience this? People floating on the river, or does the Rogue River Trail go right by it?
Yes, both. Primary access is rafting. There's just more people tend to raft than tend to hike, but hikers can also access it. The Rogue River Trail goes right above Winkle Bar, and it's a very short detail to go see.
Yeah, awesome. And is there any online resources about it, or will you guys be, creating any sort of content about your work out there, photos or anything like that?
We can probably share some photos through the BLM Facebook page. For an online presence, we have a brief blurb on the BLM website about the Zane Gray Cabin. And sort of tangential to it is the Artist in Residence program, which is something we do every year. And while that's based just downriver at the Rogue River Ranch, most artists are inspired by Zane Gray and frequently features his cabin in their pieces.
Wow, which is like a continuity of thinking about arts way out in these remote spaces. That's amazing. And really quick, I think I saw a photo that you guys encountered bears and wildlife while you were out there. Any exciting stories of that?
What was your favorite wildlife experience, Duane?
When I preserved the cabin in 2009 and 10, there was a a mama bear with 2 cubs would sit in the blackberry bushes and just watch me work every day. But she minded her business and I minded mine, and they're not very aggressive down there if you give them space. But there's a lot of wildlife down there, and just be mindful of it.
So in addition to these 2 archaeologists out there taking care of this cabin, it is under the careful, watchful eye of the bears. So thank you both so much for joining us today. That wraps up this round of Underground History on the Jefferson Exchange. I'm your host, Chelsea Rose. Show producer is Natalie Golay. You can find this episode and more wherever you get your podcasts.